We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey. Welcome, Patti. Welcome for joining us today on my podcast. I'm really excited that you're here, and we'll get into what you're going to share. But first, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Well, I live in the Annapolis Valley of Nova Scotia. Beautiful place. Yeah, born and raised here. As you said, I am a registered massage therapist. I'm a life coach. I'm a neuroplasticity practitioner. I'm also a wife and a mom of two beautiful, now grown young men.
Oh,
And many pets.
sounds like me.
Yeah, I have a very full life. And I'm grateful for all of it. So, I about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, what led me to ultimately end up having this conversation with you. I kind of had a hit the wall moment with my health. I guess in old school language, you'd call it a nervous breakdown.
Sometimes
Right.
when we don't listen to our bodies, that's exactly, if you
No.
don't listen, that's what's going to happen, right?
Well, and the interesting thing is I thought that I was doing a pretty good job keeping all the balls in the air, right?
And you probably were for a long time, right?
I was, right? I was running on automatic pilot, and I was doing all the things and being everyone to everything to everyone. And in hindsight, what I realized that my own needs on this priority list of all the things and all the people and all the creatures that I needed to care for and keep alive, my own needs were not only not on they weren't on the bottom of the list, they weren't even really on the list.
I can relate.
Yeah. So turns out that's a recipe for health disaster.
It's the perfect storm.
It is the perfect storm. And I had been doing it at that point. I was in my early 40s. So I had been doing that for, 15 years ish. Well, let's be honest. I've
Probably
been
longer.
a lot longer than that. But, as far as being a wife and trying to run a business and trying to keep run a household and, keep all those balls in the air. And of course, Lisa, do it perfectly.
Right.
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 Of
No
course,
mistakes.
it has to be done perfectly.
Right.
Which, now I don't even believe in the concept of perfect, but, at that time, that was what was driving so much of my behavior. So I hit the wall. The catalyst for my particular, falling off the cliff was that I had one of my brothers was in a car accident, and he had sustained some really severe injuries, and he didn't have a medical doctor at the time because he had just moved back here. And I went into, well, I need to fix this.
Oh dear.
I need to find him a doctor. I need to do all of the things.
Be the caretaker.
Right. I mean, because I jokingly say I should have been born with a tattoo on my forehead that says it's my job to fix everything.
Oh yeah, me too. I know. And it's the whole people pleasing thing, right?
Yeah, people pleasing, feeling like your value comes from how you can solve problems for other people
Right.
and make things right in their world. And in hindsight, none of that is possible.
I mean,
Really
it
at
does feel good to
all.
help people, right? And it does feel good
Yeah, it
to
does. It
bring
does.
a difference into people's lives. So that that's
Absolutely.
what draws us. And it sounds like you're probably an empath, right?
Well, yeah, it's interesting, right? It's such an interesting language. I definitely would have identified that way. I still see myself as being a very compassionate person, an empathetic person, but this is such an interesting part of this conversation because I think using this memory reconsolidation work that I trained in and that I use for myself and other people now, I was able to kind of even rewire that identity, because what I realized is being really hooked into this identity of being a highly sensitive person and being highly empathic, it's draining, right? Like feeling like you are able to feel and assume that you understand how other people are feeling all of the time,
Yeah.
it is really, really draining for us on an
It
energetic
really
level.
is. It honestly, it is. And I didn't even realize I was to that extreme until over the last couple of years. So I understand why
Right.
I walked around like probably a zombie.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's
Mhm.
just, I don't necessarily love the word boundaries, but we don't know how to hold sort of firm edges of where we end and someone else begins.
Our space.
Exactly. And I think when we don't, then of course we're going to be naturally inclined to want to take responsibility for how everyone else is feeling, for how they're behaving, for how their lives are evolving.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really grateful that I learned that that is not neither really possible, because can we really know for sure what someone else is
No.
experiencing and feeling? And also, does it help us or them to assume that we do know? And I started to realize really firmly that no, that's not an identity that's serving me or anyone that I love. So I was able to kind of rewire how I perceive myself in that sense. And I'm much healthier by virtue of that. I'm able to now let people have their experience and I have my experience, and I'm there and present to support them, but I'm not taking responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because the thing that I realized, Lisa, and I realized this a long time ago, or pretty early on in this journey, was that if I am so overwhelmed and my nervous system is so dysregulated and I'm so depressed and anxious that I can't get out of bed,
Yeah.
and I'm not much good to
Right.
anyone else, right? I can't
Yeah.
help things in my world on a micro level better. I can't make the world better on a macro level better if I'm laying in bed unable to function. So I was able to kind of reel that back and say, Patty, just focus on the things that you do have some control over, which is your state
Correct.
and how you impact other people, right?
Right.
And I guess the thing that occurs to me is if more of us understood that and could
Mm-hmm.
embody that and could do the work to help us really occupy that space in an authentic way, wow, would things look different, right?
Mm-hmm.
On this planet.
Yeah. I took it a
Yeah.
step further. Not only could I feel like when I walk into a room and I could feel
Yep.
something, I would create a whole story. I would create, like,
Right.
I would
Right.
run off with it. Right. And
Yes.
it's so interesting when I think back on that, of how
Uh-huh.
my mind would just run off with it
Oh,
and
well,
create this whole story that I, I am sure I was always wrong, on the story. I mean, I may be feeling something from them, but the story that I created from that came from my own stuff.
of course.
Right.
Where else could it come from?
Right.
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 And our brains are so good at storytelling. They're
Mhm.
naturally wired to want to catastrophize and go to the worst case scenarios about everything
Right.
out of a desire to keep us alive. It's, so much primal neurology there that is focused on survival, and that drives those worst case scenario stories.
Sure does. And my brain would go there every time. And I shared an experience recently where I had that happen. And what was really empowering for me is I became, awareness is number one, right? And so I became
Yes.
aware, and I stopped it. I went, whoa, whoa, whoa. Because my brain
Nice.
was going to an absolute worst case scenario. And of course, when that happens, all the alarms go off in my body.
Of course.
It is the most hopeless feeling. It really is hopeless, right?
Yeah.
And I went, no, 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 I'm not doing this.
Right.
I'm going to sit and I'm going to imagine what I want this outcome to look like.
Uh-huh.
And I focused on that. And all of a sudden, after a bit and some meditation, I felt my body calm down, my mind
Uh-huh.
calm down,
Yes.
and I was settled. And then I could manage the crisis
Right. You
instead
stepped
of
out.
going into the crisis, just,
Right.
out of
You,
control.
you sort of pumped the brakes on the story,
Correct.
right? And you were able to sort of change the total trajectory of how that went down. Absolutely. I
Yeah.
hear you, and I applaud that. And that is absolutely what I try to put in practice as much as possible. I mean, we are all human and we're going to have moments where we go off the rails, but I think the more balanced we can get our nervous systems, so that sort of our default nervous system state gets
Yeah.
an upgrade into a more balanced, calm place,
Right.
and the less time, the further we don't go off the rails as far.
Right. Because
Yeah.
recovering from that's
Mhm.
what always got me, is getting to that place. Like, I lived that lifestyle for a long time, so I didn't notice it. And once you get away from it, and then that happens, and you have those feelings, you're like, oh, and the recovery from that, if you allow yourself to stay in that state, the recovery takes a long time for
Yeah, well,
me.
the longer we stay there, the longer it takes to crawl up out of it, right?
It
So
does. And it's exhausting, and it's so hard on your body and your mind. And it's so, yeah. So by regulating yourself better, you can stop yourself from going to that extreme.
absolutely. And I think that's the key, right? Like nervous system regulation is, I don't know. In my experience, I feel like it is sort of the key to the castle on so many levels, right?
Yes.
Of better health, of being able to create a life that you're actually consciously, deliberately creating, as opposed to just, losing your free will to your programming,
Right. And
right?
just being a victim, right? Just,
Right.
right.
Yeah, no, I think it's very difficult to be aware of our thoughts and to know
Mhm.
that we need to interrupt those paths that we're going down and create new ones and refocus if we're just on automatic pilot, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's what so many of us, and this is not me judging, or
No.
it's the human condition, until, if we are fortunate enough, right, to have something that drives us to look for other ways of understanding our experience. And I genuinely look at that time in my life that was so horrible at that time as a gift, right? Like probably one of the biggest gifts I've ever received, because without that, I would not have been inclined or, motivated to
Right.
look beyond my programming and look for a different way to respond to what I was experiencing. So I'm so grateful for it now. Right.
Right. At the time, it's tough, but yeah, it is
Yes.
definitely a gift. And for, if nothing else, it started your self-awareness, the true self-awareness for yourself, right?
Yeah, it did. It did. And it really ended up putting my life on a whole different trajectory. Like yeah, I mean, I don't know that. Yeah, I mean, honestly, if I think about this, Lisa, like the way I spend um, the time I spend sort of focused on my work now, my work life has completely transformed in terms of the type of work that I do, the level of purpose and fulfillment I feel in that work. And I just know now that when I get up and I spend time with my clients, or I spend time in the group program that I'm a part of, I know without any doubt that I am having an important impact on the lives of these folks. And it's not that the massage therapy didn't feel that way, but this feels like it feels much more impactful. And when you help people change their innate programming, right? Upgrade,
Transform.
and have different default states, and their relationships get better, and everything in their life improves, then the ripple effect of that is so profound. I mean, I've seen it in my own life as I became healthier, the way I communicated sort of verbally and non-verbally with my
Hmm.
husband, with my friends, and with my extended family and my children, it totally changed, and so often I think you can make a compelling argument that we as women are sort of the centerpieces of the family,
Hmm.
and we sort of set the tone for the culture that exists in our families.
True.
I can tell you my family culture got a major upgrade when I got my nervous system in the right state. It was, and I'm still seeing it,
Yeah.
like I'm still seeing it evolve. And because if, I did all this nervous system reprogramming work, it's not that everyone around me also did it,
Right.
but, but as I have changed, obviously the the way I'm showing up in those relationships has changed so much. So I'm role modeling
Hmm.
different kind of behavior, and slowly but surely the people around me are starting to sort of mirror that and meet up with me there.
Hmm.
Wow, things have and it's not that my family life was ever tumultuous or really bad, but wow, it's just so much more peaceful and right. It's lovely.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Better than
so,
you expected, I'm sure. I know for me, that's true.
yeah, I don't know that I would have ever believed that it was possible
Mm-hmm.
for to change some of those sort of defensive, those reactions that I would have to certain circumstances. And it turns out it is absolutely possible. Even if you've been practicing this stuff, practicing it for decades, it is absolutely possible to change these reactions. And sometimes it doesn't take any time at all if you know the right,
Mm-hmm.
if you know what to do. And it's just fascinating to see how that impacts the people around you. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy. It's interesting. It's fascinating. It's very empowering to
Yeah.
realize how impactful we can be.
Yes.
And of course, it's lovely to see how, when we become more peaceful, we enable other people to become more peaceful.
True. And we
It,
draw more of that in our life as
of
well.
course, right? We attract what we are. So
Correct.
I firmly believe that. So yeah, it's been a really interesting process. I don't even know where we started in this line of questioning.
So, well, let me take you back. So it's a conversation,
Yes,
and I
yes.
think this is great. And so
Yeah.
I was going to actually let's take you back to when you hit a wall,
Yes.
health
Right.
shut down.
Yeah.
And so tell us how that was and how you got yourself out of this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I remember pretty clearly. I remember I went to bed probably on a Monday night and I felt relatively normal. I mean, overwhelmed, a little stressed, keeping all the balls in the air, but I recognized myself. And I woke up the next morning and I didn't feel like I was the same person. Like something had shifted. I feel like, this situation with my brother and the pressure I was putting on myself around trying to help him
Yeah.
was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. And I woke up and I remember feeling like sort of a sense of dread and very anxious as I got up and started moving through my day, doing all the things I would normally do. I just had this profound sense of anxiety. And then over the next few days, it continued to get worse to a point where I felt like I wanted to crawl out of my skin. It was a
Oh, I
very
know
bizarre,
that one.
yeah. And then that turned into this very heavy depressive feeling that it was like a cloud that just kind of descended down around me. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced before in my life. And it was scary. And my husband actually happened to be away for a few days while this happened. So the timing of that wasn't great. Because he's always been my biggest cheerleader and my biggest support. So that made it a little bit more stressful. However, I got through it and, it was scary at the time, but after that, um, it's kind of fuzzy, honestly, but over the next probably 6 to 12 months, I moved out of that most acute phase of that, where I was I wasn't thinking about killing myself or anything, but I had flashes of being sort of like passively like that. Like, this is just all things like it's too much. And I don't know, maybe it'd be better if I wasn't here, which was also very alarming because I had never felt anything or like experienced anything like that before. So I think the first step out of the ditch, that is the expression that I use for this. I realized at that time I was going through some very profound hormonal changes, early
Oh.
40s, right? Like the perimenopause thing is no joke.
It
Um,
isn't.
it is no joke. And I think the chronic stress levels that I was under, for a whole bunch of different reasons, definitely contributed to that, making it more profound. So I did end up working with a medical doctor who did bioidentical hormone replacement. And he was incredibly sensitive and incredibly compassionate and supportive. I don't know if it was so much the hormones that he prescribed for me, or if it was the fact that I was sitting across the desk, table from a medical person who said, "You're not crazy. Your hormones are completely out of whack. And there's lots of physiological reasons why you're feeling the way you're feeling. And I can help you with this." The sense of relief. Right? Like,
I know. I
okay,
had a doctor do that for me too. And it was really,
yeah.
it's like, because you're just
Okay.
carrying all this guilt and
Well, and you feel broken.
thoughts.
You feel
Yeah.
inherently broken. And I definitely felt that way because on the outside, Lisa, if you looked at my life, I had no reason to be in the state I was in, right? I had a loving husband, two beautiful children, a really comfortable home, a job, food in the fridge. Like, what did I have to be profoundly anxious and depressed about? Right. So I was judging myself around
Mhm.
that. So that was, that was a really decent sized step up out of the ditch, having someone see me and validate that I wasn't crazy and assure
Yeah.
me that I wasn't broken. And I think the support that I got in terms of the hormones it was helpful. It did
Mhm.
start to give me a little bit of momentum in the right direction. And then from there, I came across the work of Dr. John Sarno, who does that name anything to you?
No. Say it again.
John Sarno.
Okay. Mm-mm.
So he make this the Coles Notes version of this story, but I can't, at that time I was experiencing, in addition to the anxiety and depression, I had been dancing with chronic pain for years. And at that point, it was no longer it was no longer an on again, off again dance. It was on full on time. And I happened to come across a book in a random Google search called Healing Back Pain. Just this very unassuming little paperback that takes about maybe 4 or 5 hours to read.
I'm gonna write that down. Healing back pain.
Healing back pain. So this was the next major step up out of the ditch for me, reading this book. It basically, his theory was that oftentimes when we get stuck in cycles of chronic pain, and as it turns out, all kinds of other things. But the initial, he was initially directing this theory towards chronic pain. It's a result of your body expressing emotions that you have not processed. So it basically all kinds of suppressed emotion that I don't know, I don't recall exactly what sort of language he used around that, but essentially that your nervous system and your brain as a way to, there's a couple different theories. It distracts you. If you're in pain all the time,
Yeah.
then you are focused on the pain, right? So you're not having to deal with the emotions that are maybe present.
Ooh, that's a good point.
Well, and this book was like, it was a real watershed moment for me because it was almost as if he'd written the book about me. It felt so
Wow.
resonant with my experience. So there was that aspect to it. And absolutely, like when I was at my worst, the first thing that thought would come into my head when I became wakeful enough in the morning to start having thoughts was, how bad is my back going to be? Like, how bad does it feel right now? How bad is it going to feel when I get up to walk to the washroom? How am I going to get everything I need to get done today? If it's really bad, total focus, like almost OCD level focus.
I can relate 100%.
Yeah, on this sensation. Well, if I'm that focused on that, I'm not acknowledging or having to focus or process all of this emotional stuff that maybe is happening, right? If I'm feeling stress about my children or stress about my finances or stress about my relationship or whatever it is, there's no more compelling thing to focus on than having pain, right? It keeps our focus. So that understanding of it really resonated with me because I was really like, wow, okay, this is uncomfortably familiar, right? And then, the other thing that book laid out was a whole sort of personality profile or profiles of the type of people that tend to be prone to this sort of manifestation of pain and other things, symptoms in the body that are actually starting as a psychological process.
Right.
And people pleasing, perfectionistic, hardworking, type A, very strong social conscience, and fawning type personality, someone who's always trying to fix things for other people.
Yep.
Anyway, I'm going down this list, Lisa, and I'm just like, yep, tick, 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 tick. So this was a real eye-opening thing for me reading this book. And he basically outlined a very simple but not easy way to break these chronic pain patterns. The first step was understand that this is what's happening.
Right. I mean, that alone is
huge. It's huge, right? I mean, the sense of relief that I had, I mean, it was all very similar to the sense of relief I had sitting across from the hormone doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm not crazy. This could very well be part of why I'm experiencing all of this stuff. So that, first of all, understand how it works. Second of all, start going out and living your life again, because, what more compelling neuroplasticity exercise, to how to retrain your brain that you're actually okay than to go out and start living again.
Right. Proving to your brain that I'm good. I'm good.
I'm okay. I can do, I can go and I can live. And then the other part was some sort of emotional discovery, so whether that's journaling or therapy or whatever it ends up being. For me, it took the form. I did do a short dance with some talk therapy, which was really, it was only helpful for me in the sense that I didn't realize how shut down I was. I didn't realize how close I really was keeping my emotions to my chest. And it was revealing for me in that sense. It did not do anything, however, for me in terms of rewiring what I was doing or how I was feeling. So journaling was helpful in that regard. It became a regular thing that I did, a very specific way of doing it that allowed me to bring some of these emotions that I had been suppressing out in a way that I wasn't dumping them on around the people that I loved. Right. I was letting off some steam in a way that was safe and it was healthy and it wasn't hurting anything.
So let's touch on this real quick because I believe in journaling and I know how helpful it is. And I know people struggle with it, right?
Yeah, they can. Yeah.
Tell us how you journal. Like, give us an idea of how you do, because there's many ways. There's not a wrong way.
Absolutely. And I dabbled in a lot of them before I landed on one that actually made a difference for me.
Right.
Yeah. So what I do is, and I still use it, Lisa, like, I'm not a robot. I'm a human. Things still happen. I can still get stressed. And so this is one of the main things it's one of my main tools in my toolbox. But yeah, I typically will just go somewhere quiet and ask myself some leading questions. My favorite one tends to be, what's happening in my life right now that I can't accept?
That's a good one.
Yeah, that'll usually take me places that are quite helpful and revealing.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but the most interesting part of this exercise is that after I ask myself the question, I then sort of step out of 53-year-old Patty's shoes and into like 5 or 6-year-old Patty's shoes. So I'm doing this, the precursor to this should be that this exercise is done with the full intention that you're destroying it as soon as you're done.
Okay. So you like literally shredding up the paperwork. Yeah. And I tell people, if you're not comfortable, if that's what you're worried about, someone reading it,
destroy it. Go fully. Yeah. You're like, it's getting shredded, deleted, burned, whatever.
Right.
It no longer exists. As soon as you're done, it's gone.
Right.
So that was one of the main things. I would go into it with that intention. And I would write, initially I would set a timer for myself, because I think sometimes when you're developing a new skill and it feels uncomfortable, there's a good likelihood you're going to get 5 minutes in and maybe have a little bit of writer's block and just be like, oh, I guess there's nothing else there. But if you can kind of have the discipline to sit there and wait for that to pass, often that's when the real juicy stuff comes. Right.
True.
Yeah. So yeah, I would do it in a way that if I were a little child that was having a really intense emotional experience and I didn't have to censor myself and I didn't have to worry about using, proper sentence structure and punctuation, and I could just full on dump it out.
Dump. Yeah, exactly. Just write whatever
comes into your head. And honestly, Lisa, like, I do not journal in the same way that I talk, right? Like it gets icky. And I use bad language, and I say sometimes in my journaling will express things about people that I would throw myself in front of a bus for without thinking twice, because I have a beautiful family that I would give my life for, but doesn't mean that I love every moment with them. No.
Right. Or everything they do, right? You'll always love them, but you're not always going to like what they do. And that's okay.
Right. So let's acknowledge that and find a safe place to put that emotion so that it doesn't get stored up in our body. Right.
Right.
So when I started to do it that way, wow, did it ever shift things for me, and it was a discipline. It was a practice. For a number of months, I was doing it almost every day. Almost every day. And some days I would journal on something that was happening presently. Other days I would journal about something that had happened in the past. It was just a practice of going in and excavating what was in there and
At
getting
that
it.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Whatever's
getting,
bugging you at that time or
yes.
affecting you.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So the cumulative effect of that over a period of months was all of a sudden I was able to do things physically that I hadn't been able to do before. And the other key fact, one of the key things that I failed to mention about Dr. Sarno's approach to healing was that in addition to understanding it, starting to live your life again and doing some emotional work, the other really important thing is stop all physically focused treatments.
So like
massage, chiropractic. Here I'm a massage therapist, and I stopped having massage. No, I mean, massage is a beautiful modality. But for me, at that point, after having been a registered massage therapist for 20 plus years, I was very, very indoctrinated to think completely biomechanically, right? If there's a problem, if someone's having pain, there's a biomechanical reason for it. Okay.
Got it.
Right. I had to teach my subconscious that in actual fact, yeah, maybe the muscles are not completely balanced. Maybe there's some tightness in the fascia. Maybe there's all of those things, but that's not why you're having some pain.
That's not the root problem.
That's not the big problem here, Patti. So I had to take a really hard stance on that. And I stopped having all physically focused treatments for a number of years.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was the other thing that I did. It was, for me, it was really important to take that hard stance because I had so much programming around everything has to be perfectly balanced and there can't, and this just didn't make any sense to me anymore. I just could not wrap my head around the idea that I was that delicate, right? Because I was intensely physical. I was very active. I did a lot of physically laborious things in my life. And then all of a sudden I couldn't do any of them. Like that just didn't, without any major trauma, injury, or, that's why what Dr. Sarno was teaching made so much sense to me. Made way more sense than what everybody else was suggesting.
It's true. And I'm in agreement with you because I know for me, I've had a lot of physical pain and I've had a lot of surgeries.
Yes.
And it comes from, I know so much of it comes from my history.
Right.
And, it's stuff that I've stored in my body. It's, I was actually physically abused. So there's that, but there's also a lot I stored in my body. And I did that for years, and my body, it could only take it for so long. So I 100% agree and believe in what you're sharing because I've experienced it myself. I'm not running to the doctor all the time now.
No. I mean, we don't want to affirm for our nervous system or our body in general that we're broken, right? We want to affirm that we're resilient and we're capable and we're strong. No, I am not averse to people getting support in terms of those types of modalities.
Right.
I think for me, I just had to be very conscious of what was my intention. Like, am I going to have a massage to show myself love and compassion and caring, or am I going to fix myself? Right. The intention behind why I was doing these things had to change. So now I can do that and it's great, right? It can be a form of self-care, but it's not because I'm broken and I need to be fixed. So yeah,
that's interesting because I love massages and I often go with that intent of, my back's really hurting and I need her to massage the knots out, like not going and really enjoying it like I really do. I'm going to get fixed.
Yeah, it's a very different feeling. It's a different
is.
And I had to very consciously, deliberately make that shift. After a number of years of not having any interventions, I started to be like, okay, I think I'd like to be able to go back and start supporting myself in these ways. But I had to be really mindful about what my intention behind doing it was.
Which is true with everything, right? But it's like,
yeah,
this is so eye-opening and I get it. And I've done it to a degree, but hearing it now, like I'm really going to implement this stuff in my life. And I am absolutely going to read his book for sure.
Yeah, it's a great book. I recommend it to everyone, honestly, like whether you have pain or not.
Right.
Because you could take out healing. You could just have healing fill in the blank. It could be virtually anything. Now, he's not saying that, if you have cancer or a fracture or you're having a heart attack, that this is going to heal it. He's talking about the chronic stress-induced things, right? Yeah. So this, Dr. Sarno's work, learning that, applying it in my life, that was step 2 up out of the ditch.
Big
and
steps.
big steps, huge quality of life shifts. And then the third step, and the one that has, ended up being incredibly impactful in my life on so many levels, is learning about neuroplasticity in a more direct way. Because definitely what Dr. Sarno was talking about was, it was a form of neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
But this is the type that I'm talking about. This memory reconsolidation work specifically, it is a complete and utter game changer for anyone that applies it in a consistent way. It totally up-leveled my life. It up-leveled my health. It changed how I do my work. It changed my relationships. It changed everything about my life to the positive. I don't love the language, when people will say, I'm so much better than I used to be. I don't love that language, because that would imply to me that there was something wrong with us before.
Right.
And I think it's really important that we're conscious of how we're speaking about and to ourselves.
I agree.
But I feel like what it allowed me to do, this neuroplasticity work allowed me to sort of all these layers of disempowering beliefs and trauma and emotional baggage that inevitably gets piled on top of us as we move through our lives. It allowed me to kind of one by one sort of shed them, right? Pull them back. And this fully formed, compassionate, centered, creative version of me that was there the whole time.
Yes. Just
Now
buried.
She had a clear path, right?
Mm-hmm.
To step forward and take the wheel of the bus. So yeah, that was when things kind of shifted in a way where everything about my life blew up in a good way. When I discovered, yeah. It was, I remember going to one of the trainings for this, Lisa. I had to travel to go to a seminar, and I was still, it was still very much an up and down situation for me with my mental health at that time. I'd have really good days, and then I'd have days where I was still wrestling with myself. And I had to get on this plane. I hadn't slept the night before. I landed in the Chicago airport by myself, this throng of people. And I was on my way to another city that I had never been to before. Wasn't going to know a soul when I got there. And I remember getting off the plane in Chicago and thinking, Patti, what are you doing? Get on the plane and go back home, right? What I understand now was a wave of anxiety came over me.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And what are you doing? Right. And I'm so grateful that in that moment, I just sat myself down and said, listen, you're invested in this now, both financially and from a whole bunch of other perspectives. We're not turning around. We're going to keep going. So I did manage to put one foot in front of the other and keep going. And I'm so grateful that that was the choice that I made, because whenever we take a step towards doing something that is unfamiliar, even if it's obviously and overtly positive, it's going to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what to expect. The unknown.
No. So, and our subconscious always wants to keep us in alignment with what's familiar, even if familiar isn't good. So I'm so grateful that I didn't, that I soothed that voice and just kept going, because it was the beginning of, wasn't the beginning, but it was definitely a major step forward in my journey. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now I'm at a point where, honestly, like, I feel like I'm healthier mentally and physically, probably. I mean, I'm older. My body's a little bit less flexible, a little bit less, energetic, but in so many other ways, healthier than maybe I've ever been in my life.
Yeah.
Definitely mentally healthier, right?
Yes.
I've stepped off the adrenaline train. I no longer let my wounds drive my choices and my behaviors. So, that's a very empowering place to live.
Yeah.
It's a game changer. And like I said, it's not about perfection. It's not that every day is perfect and, that I feel like on top of the world every moment of every day. But the beautiful part is that when something stressful is happening and I recognize that, I'm very aware of it. I have tools that I can use to regulate my nervous system, bring it back down into balance. So, the analogy I like to use is that I'm no longer on the big, scary roller coaster with all the health warnings. Like, don't get on this if you have a a heart problem. Don't get on this if you have a neck problem. I'm now hanging out in the kiddie part of the fair and riding the kiddie coaster, right? Where it's fun and it's a little bit of an adventure, but it's not
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah. Yeah. That's terrifying.
that's kind of how I feel about my life now. And it's not that I don't have moments of utter joy and bliss. I do. And it's not that I don't have moments of, when something bad happens, that I'm not really sad about that. But the beautiful part is that I don't get stuck in either of those places. So when the joyful moment passes, I'm not suffering. And when something, I'm able to sort of practice non-attachment and be there fully, but not cling to it.
Right.
When something bad is happening, I don't get stuck there either. So yeah, it's a lot more peaceful way to live.
Right. I mean, for me, just having the awareness of I don't have to stay in my suffering. I don't have to stay there and rethink and get in my cycle and think it over and suffer and get the physical effects of it and ruin a day or two being in that place.
Right.
And sometimes I was in that place for probably weeks, I'm sure,
I
just
get
because my mind would get going. And so it's so empowering to go, these thoughts sometimes they're just going to show up. Like they're very sneaky, right? They just pop in.
Yeah,
And as soon as you
absolutely.
recognize, oh, wait a minute, what am I thinking on? Because I'm not feeling real great, and recognizing it. And like you say, when you build up your toolbox of the
Yes.
things that work for you, and everybody has their own custom toolbox, because I really honestly don't believe there's just one way to heal or one way to
No,
grow.
of course
There's
not. No.
many ways. Like you're sharing with us what you created custom for
Mhm.
you, and
Mhm.
you're able to use a lot of this on other, helping
Yes. To
others.
help other people.
And
Absolutely.
so it's very empowering, that you don't have to go to that place, stay there, and then the cleanup and recovery.
Well, like you said earlier, Lisa, the longer you spend there, right, the harder it is to pull out of it. So I think it's such an interesting conversation, because I think there's this sweet spot, right, between experiencing something that is eliciting some uncomfortable emotion, right? And whether that's something acute that's just happened that you didn't anticipate, or whether it's an old pattern that's just resurfacing because something
Mm-hmm.
triggers it. I think it's important to notice what we're feeling and acknowledge it
Yes.
and be present with it, because if we don't, then we're just suppressing it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that's important, but like we don't want to stay in it, right? So how can we develop a mechanism where we can have enough self-awareness and compassion for ourselves that we notice, we acknowledge, we soothe the parts of ourselves, those emotions that are coming up, and then take some action to move ourselves out of that state,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that we don't get stuck there. It's such finding that rhythm, right? And what that looks like for each of us. It's sort of it can be a really beautiful journey, and it's
Right.
never the same for two people. And it may not be the same for one person from day to day, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
it's such an interesting conversation.
It is. And
Yeah.
what's cool is, like I was saying, like the steps that you're saying are kind of the same, but what steps you use in there, like what modalities you use in that is
Right.
works for you. And I can go back to, writing, journaling.
Yes.
And like you say, putting out on a piece of paper or typing,
Yes.
or even if you feel like you want to record it, right? You just want to
Right.
record it,
Yeah. Just get
get
it out.
get it out. Because what's interesting that I have found is that a lot of times when you say out loud what's going on in your head, it has a completely different meaning or different look.
Yeah.
And
You
all of
see it
us,
really differently, right? You see it completely differently.
you do, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, now that I said it out loud, that seems silly or whatever. And it kind of
Right.
brings, and it's the same thing with writing. And we used to do an exercise in the workshop that I held for childhood abuse healing workshop. And one of the exercises we did is we had the women write a letter, and they wrote it at the time, they wrote it to God, like whatever was on their heart. And then what we had them do was just take a minute and then just start writing down what comes out of your brain. Right.
Mhm.
And that was powerful for me, because it was interesting. As I was writing my letter, I was already getting stuff and I was writing it out, but it's almost like it didn't go through my brain. It was kind of weird.
Mhm.
But when I read it, because I had
Yes.
to read it out loud, it was so powerful. So
Right.
having words out, you can disempower them or you can bring power to them, depending
Yes.
on, the situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that is something that I resonate with so much, because I have a very distinct pattern that shows up on repeat in my life. And it's that whole, I need to fix everything
Right.
thing. That's my pattern. And I mean, that can show up in the most bizarre ways. And sometimes I'll be journaling and I'll realize that whatever it is that I'm writing about, it's still there. Like it's running in the background of whatever I'm writing about.
Right.
And numerous times I've done so much work on this that as soon as I see it, as I'm writing it and I'm reading it and I see it, honestly, Lisa, I will start to laugh.
Yeah.
Right? I will
There
laugh
it is.
because I'm like, oh my God, Patti, seriously? Like we're back here again? It's almost laughable. But I mean, it doesn't mean I don't take the action. I still take the action to do an exercise to soothe that part of myself, because she's showing up for a reason, right?
Mhm.
But there's also some power and some levity in the idea that you can see it really clearly, and you can learn to almost not take yourself quite so seriously. You can learn that you don't have to believe every thought that you think and every feeling
Right.
you have. You can develop a different relationship with yourself, and that,
Mhm.
oh wow, it's really powerful.
So I want to reiterate, because I'm going to actually try your journaling idea. I really
Okay.
love
Okay.
it. So you just write it down, or you could, like I said, you can do a voice,
Yes.
whatever, something that you can just write. And I guess writing it from the little girl, her
Mhm.
perspective,
Yeah.
is huge, because that perspective is very different than our perspective today
It's
as adults.
unfiltered. It's
Yes.
unfiltered. It's raw. It's not having to censor. It's not having to be logical, right? Because we don't develop the capacity to think logically and rationally and critically think until we're like 8 or 9 years old for most.
Right.
So
Right.
until that point, it's all just there. And children, given the opportunity, right, under the right circumstances, when they have a strong emotional reaction to something, what does that look like for most of us? It all just comes out, right?
It's true.
They cry until they're done crying. They have a temper tantrum and they kick and they punch things until they're done. So that emotional energy all gets an opportunity to get moved through their body and out. We don't do that as adults. And so many of us
Yeah.
experience things in our childhoods that actually actively discourage the expression of those emotions, right?
Mhm.
Oh, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about.
Yes.
You're not allowed to be angry. Who do you think you are? Children are to be seen and not heard. Like
Yes.
most of us experience some measure of that sort of
Mhm.
programming that actively encouraged us to suppress any emotion that was uncomfortable for the people around us to see us have.
Right. Right.
And I mean, emotional suppression is necessary. We can't all be going around half-cocked and losing ourselves all the
No.
time. But there is definitely a tipping point where if we do too much of it, it's going
Mhm.
to show up in the form of our nervous systems getting stuck in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and then we get sick. Right.
Mhm.
So, the beautiful thing about journaling, it doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to leave your house to do it. I think the only caveat I will put on this for people is that for some people, Lisa, if they don't kind of shift out of whatever emotion comes out of them during the journaling, it's
Mhm.
important to add some sort of soothing exercise at the end.
Like for example?
Like a guided, like a self-compassion meditation or something,
Okay.
or like a pattern interrupt process. So for me, that was never really a problem. I never really would feel a lot of anger or sadness and get stuck in it when I was done journaling. I would see it, it would release, and I would feel better. But there are some people
Sure.
when they do this exercise, and if they're doing it regularly, the language I've heard is, I felt like I wrote myself into a depression, and that obviously is not what we want.
No.
Right. So we want it to be an opportunity to express, let some steam off. But then if you find yourself feeling like you're stuck in that kind of emotional state, take some action to pull yourself out of it before you walk away from it. Right. And
Yeah.
some sort of guided meditation can be helpful. A little bit of tapping or havening or some visualization or something, to a little bit of dancing, right?
Oh,
Doing
yeah.
something to bring yourself out of that state is
Yeah.
important.
One of the
And
ones I use, and it's done, I'm still doing EMDR therapy.
yeah, yeah,
And at the end of it, she has me put everything in a vessel.
yeah.
So, and I just imagine this huge vessel with this huge lid,
Mhm.
and I take it off, and anything that is affecting me from that is kind of the little leftover stuff. I
Yep.
put in the container. I put in the
Yeah.
container, and
Yeah.
then I close it up, and I put it in a closet. I
Right.
shove it back
Put
in
it
the
away.
closet, shut
Yep.
the door, and lock it. And then what she does is she has me go out to my safe place, and I created what my safe place looks like.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so I close my eyes, and then she explains or says my safe place. And so for me,
Mhm.
it's, in this almost kind of foresty area with this beautiful creek. And, she goes into the details of hearing the creek
Right.
and
Right.
smelling the,
Of
dirt,
course.
and
Make it as real as possible.
make it
Yes.
as real, feeling the sun on my skin, and really taking it in. And that has been hugely helpful.
Yeah,
So that's
absolutely.
an idea. That's a thought.
Yeah, it's just all about making sure that you shift your state,
Right.
right? Allow that emotional energy to have an outlet to get out of you. And
Right.
then make sure that before you get up and walk away from the exercise, that you do something to shift your state so that you're in a better state,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because there is value in letting off steam,
Mm-hmm.
but we want to make sure that we walk away from it feeling better than when we sat down. And some
Right.
people don't need to do the self-soothing afterwards, but I think there's no downside to doing that. you know
Right.
and my own experience is that after you journal that way, and if you take the time to go and soothe yourself, I've had some very profound experiences, right, on the heels of that kind of like doing some journaling. And then for me, the mechanism I often will use is I will go to the part of me that sort of was represented, the childlike part of me that revealed itself during the journaling. I
Mm.
will visualize going and hanging out with her, right? And spend
Oh.
time with her. And I'm telling you, I've had some very profound experiences out of doing that,
Mm-hmm.
that have had the effect of basically pressing like a really strong reset on my nervous system state that has lasted for days or weeks.
I bet I could see that, because what comfort you're giving that little girl and you.
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, like most of us, I'm going to make a strong statement here. Most of us as adults are children walking around in adult bodies.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Without question.
Unhealed children that are still holding on to the programming and the wounds that they experienced as
Mm-hmm.
children. And this, which is why, when you're an adult and something happens that's difficult, you sometimes feel like you're a 5-year-old or you're a 10-year-old, right? You're not that rational, fully formed adult human being in that moment,
Right.
feeling and wanting to behave like a child.
Right. And you'll
And it's
react like a child.
absolutely, because in that
Mhm.
moment, that neurology is what's getting activated,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Which leads me into why this whole memory reconsolidation thing is so
Yeah.
powerful. So the premise behind this is, as children, we have these impactful experiences, and the ones that have the most negative emotion in them tend to leave the strongest imprint in the brain, right? Because what is most of our brain really focused on? Survival
Right.
over everything else, right? Survival trumps happiness, contentment, fulfillment. Our brain is mostly focused on keeping us alive. So
Mm-hmm.
if we have experiences as children that feel threatening or feel scary, or there's a lot of fear in them, there's this strong neurological imprint that happens, that where we record what we saw, what we heard, what we felt, what we tasted, what we smelled.
Yep.
And then 30 years later, we're in a situation that reminds that deep part of our brain, that limbic part of our brain, of that experience. And now all of a sudden we're a 50-year-old woman who's acting like a 5-year-old.
Yes. All those feelings, emotions, thoughts, reactions all come back.
Right. So
Flash.
it's like we have a button in our brain that gets pushed. And the thing with this memory reconsolidation work is it essentially allows you to change that button, essentially uninstall it. Right. Because the other way you can think about this is when we have those impactful experiences in childhood, there's like a tag, right, that gets attached to that experience.
Yes.
And then we go through our lives and something feels similar, right? And it may not even be really similar. It could just be one aspect of it that feels similar, right? A similar smell, a similar taste, something that we see, a
feeling,
color, anything, right, can trigger this off. So the memory reconsolidation allows us to kind of go in and open that file using a computer analogy, right? We open the file by activating the neurology around that experience. And then in order to change a file, you have to open it, right? We open it, and then we change what your brain is doing with that information in a very mechanical way. It's beautiful, actually. So now you've removed that tag, that danger tag that's associated with that trigger. And the next time you're in a situation that feels similar to that, you're no longer reacting.
Right.
It's kind of, when you experience it, it almost feels magical, because you're like, I don't know what just happened, because every other time in my life when I was around this is how I would feel. And now I'm not feeling it. And I've definitely experienced the impact of this in my own life. I experienced a rape when I was in university, my first year of school.
I'm so sorry.
Well, thank you. The good news is, though, that it really doesn't have any impact on me anymore. I've rewired experience. So yeah, I mean, it was very, my brain went amnesic about it at the time. I didn't realize that it had happened until 6 months later. The fellow that did this walked into a room that I was in with my now husband, and it flooded, right? It all came back, and I was, oh, and I started to hyperventilate, and I had the whole reaction. So for the next 30 years or so, that would, every once in a while it would impact me. It would show up in different ways, some ways that were obvious when I was trying to be intimate with my husband, and other times I see now that it was manifesting in terms of how I would respond to other men in my life, right? I would become defensive or resentful, or I would shut down. I didn't realize that at the time, but I realized it in hindsight.
Right.
I did some memory reconsolidation work on that experience with a practitioner when I was training. And it was so interesting because the following week, a few days later, I came home. I was with my husband, and we were talking about something that would normally have been really triggering for me. Nothing to do with anything sexual. It was actually around money. It was a money conversation. And he kind of, he set it all up. Patty, I know you don't like to talk about this stuff. I know it's upsetting for you, but it was something we need to talk about. I was like, okay. I was like, wow, okay. I don't really seem to feel very triggered about that. So we sat down, we started talking about it, and it was almost like I was waiting for it. It was like I was waiting for the shoe to drop, and it didn't happen. Like, I was just sitting there having this conversation with him that a week earlier, I would have become very defensive and very shut down and wanted to, like, basically turtle and run away. And I was just sitting there staying very regulated and very calm and having an adult rational conversation about something. And it was so interesting. And his reaction was so interesting.
I bet.
What's happening? I could see it in his face. Like,
he's waiting for it too, right?
And it didn't happen. And both of us were like, okay, that was different, right? He looked a little bit like a deer in the headlights. It was actually, it was kind of funny, but the impact that has had in my life, I mean, I don't even know how to explain it, right? I mean, my relationship with him is so much better. My relationship with all of the men in my life has changed for the better.
I'm sure. I mean, that had to just be peppered throughout your life, in a lot of ways that you didn't even realize.
I didn't even realize it. That's it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, it's changed how I interact with all the men in my life, really, in every way. And I no longer have to run interference about watching movies or TV shows where there's any reference to any sexual assault. Like I'm it's not that I want to watch that stuff, but if I happen to upon it, I have no
It's not
reaction.
triggering. Yeah, it's not triggering.
I'm okay.
Yeah.
Right. Because that subconscious part of my brain no longer recognizes that as something that is a thing for me. Like
Right.
the user tag is gone. So that this is the potential of this, and the beautiful part about it is that it works, like I said, it works faster and easier than you might imagine is possible.
Right.
It wasn't years of therapy. It wasn't years of working on this situation. It was basically 2 of these memory reconsolidation sessions, and it was essentially gone.
I've actually done that myself, and I know it to be true that I know, and it surprises me because growing up, I didn't talk a lot about the stories of my childhood abuse, and I don't know why, except there was a lot of shame at the
Yep.
time. Um, and then when I would share some of the stories, of course, just the anger would rise up in
Of
me,
course. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
here we go. A few days of being down, right?
Yes.
And now I tell the story as though I'm telling someone else's story. It, honest to goodness, does not have any effect on me anymore.
Right.
And it is so liberating because
Isn't
now I
it?
can share my stories and I can help others. And the just the
Definitely.
area that I have to kind of watch in doing these podcasts, because I'm around a lot of trauma, is hearing
Of
other people's
course.
stories. That's the part that, I'm very visual, and I really have to manage that well. And I've done a really good job. That has been a big part of my focus, is making sure that I'm taking care of this and not allowing this to get overwhelmed. But I can honestly say those memories don't have an effect on me anymore at all.
Pretty liberating, isn't it?
It's wonderful. I mean, and what it does is it doesn't take up the brain space that it used to.
Well, that's what people don't understand. Like when you are going around trying to navigate around all of these minefields that,
Yes.
that you're carrying inside of you, that takes a tremendous amount of energy. It takes a tremendous amount of your life
Yeah,
force. Like to hold down those emotions that are trying to bubble up, that takes a lot of energy,
it
right?
does.
It's like you're a bomb waiting to go off all the time, and it takes energy to keep it from going off.
Yeah,
So when you rewire what your brain is doing with all of that stuff, you liberate all of this energy that you can now use for other things, right? I
yes.
mean, it's remarkable.
And your brain adapts very quickly, like you were saying.
It does. It's
It
listen.
does. It can be just a matter of, even like for me at times, it's somebody switching how I'm looking at something.
Yes.
And I'm like, ah,
Right. Oh, okay.
got it. No problem. I don't have to think that way anymore. I'm going to think this way. And
Uh-huh.
it's liberating for sure.
Well, and I think the beautiful part about it is the more regulated your nervous system gets, the more easily that happens.
True.
Right. When you get yourself into your default nervous system state is one of being sort of, as they use in the polyvagal world, like safe and social, right? You feel calm, you feel balanced, you feel communicative, you feel all of those things. Then it becomes way easier for you because your brain is online, like that creative, right? Problem solving prefrontal cortex part of your brain is now online. So
Yes.
it's way easier for you to assimilate new information. It's way easier for you to creatively problem solve. But when the back part of our brain, the survival part of our brain, when we're there, it's basically like you lose aspect to the best part of your brain.
Totally. And
You lose access to it.
I lived most of my life in that survival mode.
Yeah, you know what, Lisa? I think most of us
Oh
are.
my gosh. It was, when I think back on, and for me, that survival mode meant all my anxiety, all my anger, all my frustration, all that was like right there. And
Uh-huh.
if, God forbid, something go wrong, I could hit the ceiling because I wasn't very far from it. Right.
No,
I would
really
just go
close.
over the top. And it was
Yeah.
wondering why I was always exhausted and I wasn't sleeping. And am I, and as I have chipped away at that and rewired a lot of my thinking and having a better understanding and going deeper, it's a whole different world. And I have brain space and I'm discovering me. I'm not in survival mode where I'm trying to, like you say, manipulate everything, try to fix everything, make everything
Mm.
easy. I now like, oh, what does it do? I like? Like I'm looking at the things that I like. I'm discovering I love history. I love color. I mean, like there's so many things I'm discovering about myself that I didn't know when I was in survival mode, because that was not on the agenda at all.
No, survival was on the agenda.
Survival, 100%. And without really realizing, this is one of the modalities that I absolutely use. And I can say you can have instant changes for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't have to be this hard uphill slog that we've been sort of conditioned to think that it might have to be. I'm so
and you
grateful.
have to go through suffering.
No, I mean, that's the beautiful part of the particular type of memory reconsolidation we use. We only activate the neurology around those traumas, around those difficult experiences enough to gain access to the file.
Sure.
Right. This is not, I'm going to throw you in the deep end of the pool and let you thrash around for a while.
Let's relive everything you went through. Let's talk about it. No.
I mean, sometimes there'll be some emotion that will come up, right?
Sure.
Because you've been suppressing it for so long. But the name of the game here is to just go there enough to get it active enough so that it's electrically available to us, so that we can change it.
Right.
And then as soon as we've changed it, then we give we give the client some homework, like practice this new version of how you understand that event, practice the new version of the event, however it is your brain is rewired that. Because, naturally our brains are always going to want to go back to what is familiar.
Right.
Right. So, we always ask people, spend a little time over the next week or 10 days, just reliving your new understanding, the new way you perceive that experience. And what the science shows is that 7 to 10 days of doing that, and now you have a new neural pathway there.
Right.
And you're going to be hard pressed to come back to be able to even find those old pictures, those old emotions. And then, it's so much nicer inside of you.
Oh, so
right?
much calmer.
It's so much nicer. And, I think whatever's inside of a toothpaste, like a roll of toothpaste, is what's going to come out. So if we are filled with, anger and sadness and grief and frustration and resentment, and we haven't processed those emotions in a way that we've actually been able to change what our brain and bodies are doing with it, then guess what's going to come out of us when we get put under stress?
Yep.
So doing the work to make it nicer inside of us, right, is, I don't even have words for it. I mean,
I know it's just so much more peaceful. You're not, like, for me, I always felt like I had like a little buzz, like it was always buzzing, kind of that adrenaline, just ready to go.
Well,
and
you know what? And that stuff is addictive. Those stress hormones are addictive.
It is.
People don't realize how addictive they are.
Because I was into the drama and all that, and that stirs all that up, right? And then I got tired of the drama. I got tired of it. I wanted away from it.
Right. Well, but it is addictive,
It is.
and those stress chemicals, the cortisol, the adrenaline, the epinephrine, all of these substances are highly, highly addictive. So we have to recognize, that when you start to break those patterns, right, that don't be surprised if it feels a little uncomfortable for a while. Right?
That transition of going from, for me, going from craziness and just always the survival mode to calm was just like, okay, what's going to happen next? Like, you're waiting for the shoe to drop.
Well, and calm doesn't feel safe because it doesn't feel familiar.
Correct.
Right? We have to work with ourselves on that.
Right.
But, anytime we change our state from what has been familiar, we have to recognize it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel good, but it's also going to feel uncomfortable.
Right.
We're learning how to soothe ourselves through that. Right. And focus on our energy onto things that are representative of what we want more of in our lives. Right. That's a really important part of the process too, because you are going to liberate all this energy. And do you want your nervous system to just take you back into, well, I've got all this energy, so I better just go back over here and be stressed again.
Yeah.
And helping people get really clear on what would they rather use that energy for, and hold them, create a structure and a framework for them to divert that energy into something more constructive and support them in that, is also a really important part of this process.
Exactly. And like I was saying earlier, and this is so true, that, when you live your life like that and then you get away from it, you become much more sensitive to when those things pop up again. Right? Because you're used to living in this calm state, and that's what you've created for yourself. And so when something rises up, you're going to catch it a lot quicker.
You're going to be aware of it almost immediately.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Because you don't want to feel like that, and that's the thing with me is I work really hard not to, because I can go, my anger can shoot up real quick. I used to, be very reactive.
Okay.
And if I don't watch it, it could be like, especially if it's a kind of righteous anger.
Yes.
But like, again, how I feel when I'm in that is awful. I don't like that feeling. I don't want to feel like that. And so I've learned in my toolbox of what I need to do in order to get that calmed down real quick, so I don't do damage to myself or others. And
Other
because
people,
cleanup
exactly.
is not fun.
No, it's way better to stop it. What is the expression? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? It's so very true. Like we don't want to suppress our emotions. We also don't want to dump them on the people around us.
Right. And so
So
finding your method of how you dump
yeah,
is what works.
how you let those emotions be acknowledged and felt.
Right.
So we don't sort of swallow them and push them down and force our nervous systems into even more dysregulation, because that's what happens. Right? It's literally like a volcano that's building up steam.
Yeah.
If there isn't any opportunity for it to let off steam, that when it blows, it's probably going to be ugly, right?
It's going to be ugly. A lot of fallout.
Yeah. So it either happens like you're describing in the form of anger where you hurt people, or alternatively, it gets driven deeper into your body and you become very sick.
Yeah.
I think Gabor Mate, I watched a seminar that he put on one time, and it was with caretakers. It was people that were caretaking for a loved one that was dying. And he pulled up, it was in Toronto. So he pulled out the Toronto Post or the Globe and Mail, whatever newspaper it was, and he had the obituary section. And he had previously gone through and pulled out maybe 8 or 10 obituaries to read highlights of to the folks in this seminar. And they were all women who had died prematurely. So, 40s, early 50s. And how do you suppose almost every one of those obituaries read? It was, she was so self-sacrificing. She gave of herself. She was the full-time mom, full-time worker, ran the PTA, was manager of the hockey team. And you ever needed anything, she would be there for you. She'd just give herself away. This is how every one of these obituaries read. Right. And
I've read them. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yes.
Oh, gosh.
Right. And it was so consistent. And of course, these were people that were, caretaking for loved ones who were sacrificing their own needs to a fault. And he was definitely trying to drive a point home, but we can't live like that in an ongoing way and not expect there to be a price to pay for that.
Right. And I was a caretaker, and it is hard, and it consumes you, and that is a very difficult position to be in and try to find balance, because it's very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think there's any perfect recipe for that.
No.
And I would not even begin to imply that I know what that looks like.
Right.
But I think his point was well made.
Yes,
right?
Definitely.
In the midst of our lives, when so many of us, women in particular, I think, with the estrogen comes the desire to nurture and caretake, and not that men don't have that, but I think it is more prominent for women.
Right.
We have to remember to do that for ourselves too.
First, really. It's the old airplane thing. You got to put the mask on yourself first before you put it on somebody else, because, I've always said that, we're pouring ourselves out. We need to have time to be infilled so that we can go back out and pour out, but we got to take care of this. We can't pour out what we don't have.
No,
it will take from our body.
Exactly. The way I like to describe it to my clients is, I want you to work towards filling yourself up so full. That cup is so full that it's overflowing. And that's what you're offering to the world.
I love that. That's exactly it. Overflowing onto others.
Yep. It's pouring out of you and onto all the people that you care about around you.
You're always being infilled, and others are being filled at the same time.
That's the only way it can be.
Yeah.
It's the only way it can be sustainable. And once again, it's not about perfection. Are you always going to have that right? No, probably not. But can we have that be the sort of the vision we're creating for ourselves.
That's our goal. That's our goal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when the beautiful part about that is that when you start to get closer to that, then the love and the compassion and the care you're offering to other people is both genuine and sustainable.
And probably deeper, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't give away what I don't have.
Right.
If I don't genuinely practice self-love, then how can I really, in a genuine way, give it to anyone else? And I don't, I mean, I love bubble baths. I love spa days. I love all that stuff. I'm all about it. But honestly, I think real self-love is when we journal when we're feeling triggered, when we go and hang out with our younger parts and hold space for them to be angry or sad or whatever it is, and just spend time with them.
Mm-hmm.
When we hold boundaries around when we know we need some time for ourselves, like, I think that's the real stuff, right? That's the stuff that fills that cup up
Yes.
in a way where it can then overflow onto other people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And touch others.
absolutely. And then what are we role modeling for them?
Right. And people watch, and people are watching.
Absolutely.
They may not say something right away, but
Mhm.
they're watching. They're watching and they see it.
Oh yeah, it's very obvious. I mean, I hear
Mhm.
that from people all the time. Um, yeah, I definitely have noticed it with my children, my
Mhm.
husband in a really obvious way. And then, we influence people. It's way more impactful to lead by example,
Yes.
stand over someone and say, you should do
Yeah.
this and you shouldn't do that. Right? Like, that does not work.
That never works. That turns people off, and that
Absolutely. They
will
go the
really
other way. They
exactly.
run away from you.
Right. Right.
Right.
Right.
So it may not feel like it's as obvious, but that's the beautiful, awful part of doing this work for ourselves, is that so much of it happens in the trenches, right? When it's dark and raining and icky and yucky.
Yep.
That is the powerful stuff. That is the powerful stuff that actually ends up making a huge difference.
Yeah. There's game changers, life changers. Yeah,
It
for
is.
sure.
It is. So I think we'd love to believe that, yeah, I'm just going to go away on vacation for a week, or I'm going to go to the spa for a weekend, or I'm going to do all this stuff and then I'm going to be all right. But if you don't really actually address what your nervous system needs on a deeper level than that, it's fluff,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's fluff. And I think that's the good news of kind of the message. One of the messages I try to impart to people is that deep work does not have to be as hard as what you think.
Exactly. And people fear that, it's that I know that for a lot of people, starting the healing process is tough because especially when you haven't experienced it, it's very scary and you don't know what it's like.
Sure.
And you are going to stay with what's familiar, even though I call it comfortably uncomfortable.
Yes.
You get comfortably uncomfortable, but it's what I know, and I know what to expect.
Yeah, listen, it's
Mhm.
it's scary, right? If we've had our emotions buried for decades, for good reason, because we feel that allowing them to come up is going to be, and that's what Dr. Sarno teaches, is that the brain just creates the distraction because it perceives the expression of that emotion as being more of a threat to our well-being than the pain is.
Oh, that makes sense. And for me, what I used to think, oh, if I start crying, I won't stop.
Right, exactly. Right.
So I can't start.
Can't start, or I can't allow myself to feel angry because then I'm gonna go off the deep end. Or
Right.
and honestly, like, I think if we're doing this work in a way where we're not supported and we don't have structure and we don't have someone sort of as a wing woman or a wingman
Mhm.
there who knows what to do, there could be some danger of that, right?
True.
It's very important to be with someone who's done some of this work so that they know how to take you to these places in a way that you don't get stuck there.
It's a safe place. Right.
Exactly.
They create a safe place for you. And that is so important.
It's so important. And I don't know, in my experience, it's very difficult for someone to play that role in a really effective way if they haven't done their own work.
Correct. They can't. They
No.
can't. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
But yeah, I remember the first time I went to a talk therapist, Lisa, and it was very evident to me, even in the state that I was in, which wasn't very good, it was very clear to me that this woman was in as bad a shape or worse shape than I was. This lady, she had all the right letters after her name, but she hadn't done the right kind of work.
Yeah.
And, it was, I did not feel at all like I was safe to go where I needed to go. And I wasn't ready to at that point either, to be fair.
Yeah.
But it's all goes back to, how regulated is my nervous system? And what can I do to get it into a better state, both for myself and so that I can be present for other people. And learning the mechanics of how to do that is, I don't know that there's any time that you can spend better than that. I don't know that there's any money that you can be better spent.
Right. Investing in yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
That's what you're doing. You're investing in yourself. When you're going to therapy, if you're working with a life coach, you are don't look at, oh, I can't afford, I can't spend. You're investing in yourself. And that's part of self-care.
Well, all of that. And the other thing the question that comes to my mind is, because I think about the money and the time and the energy that I put into getting to where I am now versus where I was. And it was a lot, right?
Yeah.
And I was sort of bumbling around in the dark because I really didn't know where to go. It was a whole lot of trial and error.
Yeah, that was me too.
Yeah. But what was it costing me to not be well?
Yeah.
Right. So that's always the question I'll urge people if they're humming and hawing about taking action on doing this sort of work. What is it costing you to not do it?
Right. I mean,
your quality of life, your relationships, how much money have you spent over years on Band-Aids that actually didn't change it in a way that it stuck? Like, what is it costing you? Like, what if it's better to invest in than that? I mean, I didn't have the $20,000 or so that I ended up spending to do all of this stuff. It's sitting in a bank account, just screaming to be spent. I had to find it. Right. But I have no regrets. I am so glad that I did everything that I did because it led me to here.
Right. I mean, that's what this podcast is all about, is I want to shorten people's pain, and I can tell people, don't suffer, don't spend years suffering. And the difference, like for me, when I started my healing journey at 19 and I'm now 60, there wasn't a lot of stuff out there to help. Like I did a lot of it on my own for many, many years. And, it did take a long time. And it wasn't until probably like the last 13 years that I've really gone deep and found modalities and ways and have reached out and have had therapy where it's really helped me. You do need a support system. You absolutely, I mean, I do believe there's a time for me that I have my alone time and I work with myself, like, journaling and meditating, but you definitely need a support system, and it can't be a loved one, that they're too close to the situation. You do need to have a neutral third party that can look at it and support you and guide you.
Because we can't see our own blind spots.
Right.
I mean, as entrenched in this work as I am, and the amount of time and energy I have put into doing the work, doing the training, all of that stuff, I'm pretty good. I'm pretty self-aware, right? However, it doesn't mean that there can't be scenarios that arise in my life where I don't need a fresh set of eyes on it, because it's very difficult for us to see all of our nooks and crannies clearly.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, I just don't think, if we don't have our health, like, what do we have?
Right. And as I'm getting older, let me tell you, all the stuff that I held on to all those years is coming out of my body now. And like I said, I've had many surgeries and I've had some health stuff, because I know for a fact it's because of me holding on to stuff that I needed to let go of. And now my body's like, well, I'm going to let go of it now.
Yes, it's time.
Yeah.
It's time.
It's time. So I've let go a lot of it, and I'm not having any more of the physical stuff. I've had enough of that. Oh my goodness.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Oh, it's such an interesting journey, isn't it?
It really is, and it doesn't end, and
Oh no, that's
it is interesting, and it's not as scary as it used to be. Before it was so scary when I started, and now it's just kind of like, okay, well, here's something else that I need to work on, or here's something
uh-huh.
else that's been brought to light that I'm going to work
Yeah.
on. And changing the judgment to myself to curiosity, rather than being hard on myself, like, oh, how come I didn't see that? And oh my gosh, because I used to be very hard on myself. Now it's
Yes.
like, oh, okay, well, let's investigate that.
There's another layer that's revealed itself, right? Yeah. And the way I kind of speak about with my clients is, it's not over. Like you're not done until you take your last breath.
Exactly. This is a
That's when,
journey.
right. That's when you're going to be done, at least in this incarnation. Who knows what comes after? But for now, don't look at this as something has an endpoint,
Right.
right? Because you're a human, you're not a robot, and life is going to continue to evolve, and you're going to deal with stresses and challenges, and how can we just continue to be patient and loving and compassionate to ourselves so
Right.
that we can then offer that to other people as we move
Right.
forward, right? Like I think that needs to be the question. The analogy that I tend to use for my clients is all of this work that we're doing together and that you're going to ultimately do for yourself, it's going to be way more impactful if you can imagine it happening under an umbrella of self-compassion, gentleness, patience,
Yeah.
and persistence,
Mhm.
right? Like that's the umbrella that this needs to happen under.
Right. And what
And
you offer tools, right? And so you can
we,
have your toolbox too, and you can add these tools. So when life hits you,
Mhm.
you don't have to you don't have to react. You have these tools in place that will protect you and help you.
Right, just to help you process what it is that you're experiencing, right, in a
Hmm.
way that you don't get stuck in it. Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, my one-on-one coaching, basically I see myself as a tour guide, like I'm an educator. I'm giving
Hmm.
people basic understanding of the mechanics of how all of this works, the neuroplasticity aspect of it and how your brain impacts your body. And then I help them figure out what are the sort of really impactful experiences that you have, which you may be conscious of and you may not,
Right.
that are, your neurology is, you're basically creating your life from. And I help them actively rewire those things. And at the same time, all of this is happening, I'm teaching them how to use these skills for themselves. Right. So that is the end game here. I'm not ultimately trying to keep people in this model of I'll see you at the same time next week. Like that is not my business model. I love to empower people, right? So that they feel that they can look after themselves. And then when they
Right.
feel they need a tune up or they need a fresh set of eyes on a situation, absolutely. I'm here. I'm your girl and I can play that role for you. But I also love to empower people, right? To
Hmm.
have the understanding and have the tools. So that's one way that I work. And then the other way is that I'm involved with a group coaching program that delivers all of this in a programmatic way in a group setting, which is we're very excited about. Um, that's been functioning for a year now, and we have
Mm.
some that have been there for maybe 9 or 10 months, and the changes that they've seen in their health have been pretty remarkable. So that's really exciting.
That is exciting.
Yes, because the programmatic thing is really impactful, right? Because you have a place you can go every day, right? To be in some community. We have like dozens and dozens of guided neuroplasticity exercises that you can use that are recorded on
Yeah.
form that you can use whenever you feel like you need to change your state. So yeah, we're really excited about that. And then the newest thing that I've become involved with is that we're doing a training process where I'm going to be myself and my colleagues, and it's sort of my baby, but we're going to be training people to do this neuroplasticity work with their clients. So if it's a therapist or a coach that already has a practice and they want to
Hmm.
have different things that they can integrate into the practice, then we'll be training those folks. And then aspiring coaches that maybe want to be able to build a business or do this work with other people, we'll be training them as well. So
It'd
lots
be
of
nice if we went out of business, right? Everybody got better and we got out of business. I'd love it.
oh yeah, I mean, more and more people that have this information and have some tools they can
Right.
use to up their emotional intelligence and get their nervous system into a better place, the better off we're all going to be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's like a drop in a lake, it'll go out. It will.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it
Mhm.
spreads. Absolutely. In ways that we may not even be cognizant of,
Right. Right.
but we know it's happening.
Right.
Yeah.
So Patti, tell me, or tell the
Yes.
listeners how they can reach you. So, somebody might want to have some life coaching or join your group.
Right. Yeah. So I have a personal website, which is just my name, pattinorris.com. So there's you can reach out to me on there. I offer a free discovery call just to see if it feels like it's a good fit. And then the group program you can find at getwiredforwellness.com.
Okay.
And we have several free programs there that are really, we've spent quite a bit of time and energy to develop them. They're really good. One is anxiety focused, and one is just sort of the basics of neural retraining. Those two free programs are there. And the really great thing here, Lisa, is that like we're not holding back the recipe for people. Like we're telling you, if you want to be able to use this applied memory reconsolidation to create change in your life, here's how to do it. We're telling people how to do it. We're giving them the information for free. And we've had a lot of people go through these free programs and have pretty amazing things happen by virtue of using them there. So we feel good about that. We're really happy that we took the time to produce that. And then the coaching program just offers a place for people to go for some community and some sort of, it's a fairly high touch situation. There's a lot of interaction that you get with us inside that program. So that's for people that want to help implementing it, right? And support and community. So yeah, those two free programs are there. And also if someone was interested in learning about how could I potentially learn to do this for myself, that information is available in there as well on the website, getwiredforwellness.com.
Well, nice. And we'll have all the links available as well. Yeah. So you'll be sure to send all those links and we'll definitely include them. So,
okay. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I mean,
thank you for having me.
We covered a lot. And I think we gave a lot of great, little golden nuggets to help people.
Yes. Sure. I hope so. Yes. And I really appreciate you having me.
Oh, no problem. It's been awesome.